Hello, everybody. I hope all is well in the world of waking, dreaming, and all the places in between. Today, I'm going to discuss what's called, it's really technically Gynarchic this versus Gynarchic that, but for the purposes of not being redundant or trying to be as non redundant as possible. What I'm going to title the video is Gynarchic Ideation versus Foundational Thinking. How these are two kinds of thought process that influence our entry into the Gynarchy community, are how they even influence how we will think about us, other people, everything really, and also how we engage, what we're willing to actually do once we have the community. So I wasn't really sure how to approach this kind of video because I'm not like both of these types of individuals they do brainstorming. They consider what could be, but their starting point is different. So here's what I mean by this. Let's start with foundational thinking first. What happens when a gynarchist begins here? Uh, this is Foundational thinking is when everything that you are doing for whenever you're brainstorming a topic for the gynarchy community, or considering some kind of uh, idea that will benefit everybody, or it could just be something as simple as having a discussion. All of your thinking can be traced back to some kind of foundation, some kind of foundational thinking that has its roots in, it could be feminist ideology, feminist education or feminist upbringing, or radical feminist upbringing. And it could also be rooted in your knowledge and understanding of other cultures, especially if you have read and know things in depth about all the matriarchal societies that exist to this day and the ones from the past. So when you are considering Gynarchy or a Gynarchy community, or an in-person Gynarchy community, as a concept worthy of consideration and debate, no matter how creative you are with your topics or discussions, everything has its origin there. And I think that is something that is, I think that it has its pros and its cons like anything else. One pro of foundational thinking is that there's actually a basis for your thought process. Like, you already kind of know what works, and you are operating everything that every operation that you carry out within the community, whether it's some kind of activity, maybe a business concept, whatever it is you're doing, it's based on something you know works, and more than that, you know why it works. For instance, if you go to the East and you visit one of those matriarchal societies, you understand that those are women-centered societies, that they are more egalitarian. And because you know that, that can make you wonder, okay, well, works great for them. How about everybody else? What can we learn from these kinds of societies when we're making a Gynarchy? And I think, and I know because a few days ago I was informed by Religion Made Simple that there was a situation at one of the groups, the Gynarchy groups, called it a debacle, I think. And when I went to look into it, I found that there was another Reddit group with like 1,000 to 2,000 views or more, I was wondering why I had an uptick in viewership in one on a few of my videos, and then and of course, where were these weird comments coming from, like "bruh" or "come on"? I didn't know where this shit was coming from. It's funny, but I didn't know where it was from, and when I discovered it, these people were so one of them made like a mocking comment, like, "Don't they know what matriarchy is?" Yes, but I don't think you know what it means. It's really funny when these people who are not part of our community act like they do it all the time. And I don't even think this was the femdom community. This is like people from like a drama community. I mean, what do you expect? I expect the bottom of the barrel here when it comes to education. I mean, that's not they're not their interest is not the truth. Their interest is in entertainment. So matriarchy is literally egalitarian. You can look this shit up. This is the problem that people have when they don't know how we as Gynarchists would differentiate between Gynarchy and matriarchy. Matriarchy is egalitarian. Matriarchy is woman-centered. That's what it is. It's about the focus being on mothers. Whereas Gynarchy is concerned principally about the power in society belonging solely to women. Even in a matriarchy, men have some power and responsibilities. There are certain, like, also something you need to keep in mind about matriarchy is unlike patriarchy, matriarchies don't go around dominating and conquering people. That's a patriarchal thing. That's another bit of information that they should know before they start trying to conflate the two words. For example, there are patriarchal families around that area where the matriarchal society is. They're not going around telling those people how to live their lives. They're just living their lives. So that is kind of different from a Gynarchic a Gynarchic perception, where you are specifically concerned with women's power in pretty much every aspect of life. You want women running and ruling things. That is not the same thing as an egalitarian society. In fact, Gynarchy is it's anti-egalitarian, whereas matriarchies are egalitarian. I don't know how else to explain that to people. If they don't want to accept that explanation, then there's no further conversation that's going to be productive, because if you do not do your basic research, then you are essentially just making this all up in your head as you go along. You think that you know what's right, and therefore it's right. There's no reason to talk with that kind of person anymore. But despite these matriarchal societies being egalitarian, they do serve as a foundational thought process, because when the women in those societies do have power, it makes the people who are Gynarchists wonder, well, what about that? Can that kind of thing be applied to our society, or can we become more like them? Or do we need to just take their ideas and their principles and somehow try to apply them or transform them into something that's useful for our own purposes? And I have talked with a few Gynarchists who feel like, those are great, whatever, but we live in a different society with different rules and challenges. And so some of them believe that we can't simply mirror the structure of matriarchal societies, because we have a different kind of economic life, different political life. We have a different past than they do. We have different ways of interacting with the world. I do think that is where the foundational thinking comes in. Now, one of the negatives of foundational thinking is more rooted in the culture than anything else. And the thing about foundational thinking is, if you take it to its logical extreme, You are only everything, every kind of ounce of creativity that gushes forth and ushers, or I don't want to say oozes. It sounds like something gross. I'm trying to remember the word. Everything that emanates from that thinking, any kind of creative output, it is limited. It can be very limited by that kind of foundational thing, because if you believe in what has already been established, and you feel that that has the most credibility, and that all we can really do is learn from what's already in existence, then what good is it to start from scratch? How can you start from scratch? Can you simultaneously be influenced by foundational thinking when it comes to topics, uh, topics and topical discussions of Gynarchy, among other Gynarchists? Can you start from scratch? Can you imagine something without being influenced by that? I don't know that you can. And this is something that, although it's not a direct link, we've seen what happens like with the United States and the way that they are promoting their art lately, and they're not the only ones. Japan is doing it too. Other industries are guilty of it. It's in the art world where people are focusing on sequels, reboots, and remakes. People are already using an established franchise or concept that was already successful, and they're reusing it over and over and over again. And they're making money off of it because people will continue to throw money at them. And I think foundational thinking is in a way related to our commercial and capitalist society. We see what is working. We want to make money. We want to be successful in our culture, and so taking risks, uh, starting from scratch, doing something that is unprecedented, that could cost you big time. Why take those risks? And when there's no guarantee of success. there's no there's no way to determine if people will go out and buy your art. And so we get used to our sense of comfort. Our we feel complacent, and I do kind of, when I think about foundational thinking, I acknowledge its merits, but I'm a little uncertain about its potential downsides. I think that I think that like just being solely rooting yourself in what has come before. I don't know, because in our society we have, like, especially with marriages, how we handle them here is we tie economics to marriages, whereas in Masuo they don't. You can cut marriage with no financial ties. That is a big difference between our two societies. They don't do that. We do. We basically say, okay, when we're done, we're going to decide who gets what, who gets the money, who gets this, who gets that. We have, and I'm so sorry. So we have a different way of handling that, and of course that's also based on division of labor, our the economic past. The fact that women didn't used to be able to, they couldn't, you couldn't build wealth in the same way men could. They didn't have access to certain kinds of stuff, like they couldn't get credit cards, I believe, until the 1970s in their own name without having a male sign off on it at a bank or something like that. So foundational thinking does have its place, but I think that if you take that to its logical extreme, can that cause harm when somebody decides that, like, because I mentioned this stuff about the economics, can we just decide to throw out the idea of economics when it comes to marriage in our country? Yes or no? I don't really think it is. We can, but the thing is, we have a legal system that has entangled itself with the institution of marriage. And that system, that legal system, is inseparable from it. And so if you want to change the institution of marriage, and the way that it affects people in the United States, you have to change the legal system. You have to put people in there who think like you do. So it's like the way that maybe you want to approach and change your society to be more gynarchic. Uh, it like foundational thinking. How much can that really help you in getting to that location, or can we ever actually get to the same place that these people were? And even if we don't want to get to the same place, um, can we get to a similar one? And if we can't get to a similar one, then at what point, like, at what value does the foundational thinking still have? Is it just proof to us that yes, women can have power and authority, that they will not hold it over men and abuse them in the ways that men did to women? So I kind of just wonder what place foundational thinking does have in our topics and discussions, and how useful that will be going forward. On the other hand, you have another kind of phenomenon that occurs. This is called Gynarchic ideation, and this is something that happened to me. This was my way of entering into the community. So I read some content about these fictional gynarchy worlds where women took control, sometimes by force, other times by cunning or whatever. And for some reason, while I was exiting that hate group, I was not only enamored by the idea, I was irresistibly drawn to it. It was like I couldn't resist thinking about it. And then what started as a few thoughts became something much more. Now, I do feel that there are at least two kinds of artists who do what we call fetishistic artwork. They're the first kind, people who are, it's pure indulgence. They just want something to jerk off to. Now, I fell into the second category. I did not have any knowledge of the matriarchal societies at that time. I didn't know Maso existed. I didn't know the Kazi existed. It was completely foreign to me because my education system had failed my life, had failed people just like me. And so because I didn't know, I started imagining, okay, well, if this is how it could be in this case. I mean, my first approach when I thought about it was, this is obviously ridiculous and nuts. This is these are too brutal, or there's too much of this. But then it gave me a thought, is like, what happens if I write about my own matriarchal society or societies? How would it be structured? How would it work? And so what I ended up doing is I used my own imagination by writing certain types of fan fiction, which are still up, but I'm not proud of them. I have tried to move away from fetishistic thinking completely. I've tried to put on a more serious face towards the work that I do. So I've been in a transition period ever since I wrote those pieces of work, and I've stopped publishing them because I don't want to contribute to the community in that way anymore. But at that time, I really, although it included fetishistic content, I was more concerned with structure, process. I wanted to know, how could you implement such a society? What would it even look like? What are its customs, its rules? How does it operate? And so I went through the process of writing probably what ended up being over 40,000 word document or more, where I used my imagination to kind of fill in my own blanks to imagine, okay, so is this what it would look like? Or is that what it would look like? Would it be femocracy, not femocracy? How does that play out too? And because I was stuck in the Gynarchic ideation process, I was essentially making it up as I was going along because I had no foundation. So I used my imagination and my experience and my society as the influence for writing the material. And I ended up creating some kind of fictional matriarchal society with a lot of customs and different rules. It did have unfortunately a strong fetishistic foundation to it. Well, not strong, I wouldn't say foundation, but it had a strong fetishistic influence. And yet there was also some kind of There was some kind of justification for it. There were also I wrote like some kind of ideological underpinning for the society. Like one thing that a lot of others lacked was sort of like an like a I think I wrote some kind of ideological manifesto in it where I was trying to imagine how would these people rationalize and justify this type of society? What would their thinking be? And so I kind of wrote out all these different things that ended up being like teachings or some person's teachings, and their different reasonings and rationale for why they wanted this society. And I think that's part of what, like, I wanted to do some kind of lore background. Like in most of these works, these fantasy works for Gynarchy, they weren't principally concerned with explaining a lot of the different, explaining like in detail why. Why would you do something like this? Or why would you feel this way? So that had to be done first. And after that, of course, it got into rules and procedures and obviously rituals and sometimes just some crazy little creative additions that had nothing directly to do with the society, but I added to it because I wanted it to have its own unique flavoring. So that kind of thing happened. But then I started learning about the matriarchal societies, and so that was my entry. Eventually, I met people in the Gynarchy community while I was writing this material, and they affected and changed the way I thought about these things. And over time, I sort of left that part of me behind. It's a gradual process. I occasionally write personally for my own interests, but I do not publish that content. I don't advertise it anymore. And so I have been trying in my own way when I can to just kind of move away from that and focus more on the serious stuff and on the things that are not serious. But for me, the artwork and the writing was really a means to an end. I was trying to use that as a way to flesh out my thoughts and ideas on the topic. And I feel like that's where the second type of what you could call a Gynarchic writer comes in, is I was trying to figure out, I thought that there were problems in my head and I was trying to resolve those problems by using writing as a tool to unlock that, to find the answers. And when this is your entry into community and these are your thoughts on it, I do think this affects your engagement with the community because you are coming from a place of pure imagination. There is no basis for a lot of this stuff. It might even seem insane or ridiculous, and also a lot of it there's no connection to the legal world, there's no connection to the economic world, the political world. Like, it's totally absent in these stories because the problem with Gynarchic ideation, when you take it to the extreme, is that you can be so removed from the current society that you're in, and that you can make it up however you want. You can assign whatever rules you want. You can have it play out however you want. You can answer whatever questions you want. But none of the imagination, none of the creativity that you are investing in that, it doesn't have to have any bearing on the real world. So that's kind of a problem. If you take it to its extreme, it becomes a form of escapism. It doesn't directly affect your activism. And so when I realized I was spending so much time doing this that I was not really helping anybody in the real world or not, positively contributing to my community, I changed my attitude. I understood that it was kind of a mistake to indulge as seriously as I had. So this kind of, if again, the indulgence of Gynarchic ideation is ultimately a dead end when it comes to activism. Now, can you use your imagination to help your community to try to add to the content, to the lexicon or whatever? Yes, you can. You can use your imagination. I would just say that the writing, fueling your imagination is something that does matter, but I think it does need to have a worldly tether. There has to be something that kind of ties this stuff down, but like brings it back to reality. Like, it's good if you want to have your own imagination, but if all you have is your fantasies and your thoughts, all you're really doing is just exploring something that's within inside yourself. But if you don't kind of bring that back to the community, And I don't mean as a story, I mean using what you did there and trying to apply that, like trying to apply your imagination and your I guess your how do I put your methods as an artist and your to try to direct those in an approach towards your own community in a way that will maybe help them out. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well. I've had trouble with this for years. All I know is ideation, like the idea of like we to some extent I feel like we need a bit of both. But this is what I think happens. I think, and this is just my personal opinion, many women come from the foundational thinking. They have the feminist education, they have the academic upbringing, they have an understanding of other cultures. And I think a lot of men come from what's called Gynarchic ideation. They have a thought in their head, they have a fantasy. It can start with a relationship, it can evolve into society. And I think that their entry points into the community tend to be different. And I believe that I think that that's fascinating, but I also think you need a bit of both. I think you need foundational thinking, but you also need to be able to have Gynarchic ideation, because if you have no imagination, then you have no new approaches to solving problems in the community and outside of the community. In other words, how the community relates to other communities. So if you have no imagination, good luck solving problems, because problems will constantly arise. On the other hand, without foundational thinking, who would take it seriously as anything other than, this person's just like just somebody living in their head. They hold the whole touch grass comment that you keep seeing in the community from outside communities directed towards us. Keep touching grass. It wouldn't matter whether I touch grass or not. This is something that I and other people take very seriously. But if there's no basis, then you lose. Some people will just not grant you any credibility in or out of our community. And so I think you need a bit of both. I think that having a little, you don't have to marry these two permanently, but I do think that it's important for them to be cohabiting together inside your mind. I do see the value in both. Anyways, what do you think about it? Do you find that you are more was your entry because of Gynarchic ideation or foundational thinking, or was it somehow a mixture of both of these things? And what do you think the community needs more of? Do we need more foundational thinking, or do we need more Gynarchic ideation at this stage? Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a blessed day. Please take care out there, especially the people in Southern California.